Good evening, everybody. I hope we all had a. Oh, okay. I saw a message, so I thought maybe it was a response towards my mic. But I would like to greet you all in the wonderful name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I hope we had a lovely day and the Lord has been good in 2023. And then I'll just share my screen so that I can share. Okay, I have not used this in a long while. I hope you are able to see my screen. Can you?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Oh, okay, great, perfect. I think prayer has already been offered, but just maybe before we could start with our study for tonight. I hope it's not going to be too long, and it was so difficult to summarize some of the things and all that. But I hope the Lord will help us to get into the gems of truth that we need to know, and the experiences that we need to learn from, looking into our past history. So I just want to maybe read Revelation chapter 3, maybe verse 1 and 2. This is the message to the church of, Sardis. I know we did cover this, but I just thought I must read this. And unto the angel of the church in Sardis write, This thing saith, He that hath the seven spirits of God and seven stars, and I know thy works, and thou hast a name that thou livest and art dead. Be watchful and strengthen the things which remain that are ready to die, for I have not found thy works perfect before God. I just thought I must read through this, even though the topic for today deals with the Church of Philadelphia. But it's important to understand the spirituality or the diminished allegiance to God that actually was caused by the previous churches that had affected the spirituality of the people who lived during the time period of the Church of Sardis. And that was because of persecution and also the compromises or errors that were preached during the church of Thyatira and all that. And then the reason why now we need to jump into the church of Philadelphia, because this is the church where in verse 7 of Revelation chapter 3, the Bible says, and to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, This thing says that he that is holy, he that is true, and he that hath the key of David, he that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and has not denied my name. So Jesus acknowledges, and then it actually says, I know thy works, and then I've set before thee an open door, and no one, can shut it. And we're living in this. So we're going to be dealing with the presentation based on that period of that open door, of which this church is that of the Millerite movement, even though as Adventists we do differ in terms of the dates, or the period and all that. So I believe this is the period just in the early 1830s to 1844. So Jesus acknowledges that, yes, you've got little strength, but you have kept my word and has not denied my name. So I thought we need to have this background to say that this is the church that had little strength, but with that little strength, they never denied the name. They held onto the truth that was being revealed gradually and all that. So maybe just to start, as we start with section 3, based on our church heritage manual or book, obviously our first sub topic will deal with the second angel's message, Revelation 14 verse 8. The Bible says, and they followed another angel. I think last week we dealt with the proclamation of the first angel message that was calling everybody that the judgment has come. So let everybody worship God, the Creator who made the heavens and the earth. And then now we are living in a time when this is the time when now the proclamation of the first continues, and then the proclamation again of the second angel's message was actually proclaimed also during this period. So when you read the second angel's message, the Bible says, and they followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she had made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So the second angel's message, as I've said, was proclaimed during that tearing time, the waiting time, that we also find in the book in Matthew chapter 25, in the parable of the 10 virgins. And this was the period between March and October 1844. And then we're going to go through their experiences in coming up with a wrong formula in the calculation of the 2300 days Bible prophecy that we find in Daniel chapter 8. And then I'm going to introduce a very important person here, and this is William Miller. William Miller, he, when we read in history, he began to read or to study God's word around, or in the mid, 18, let me just say 1815, 1816, around that time. And then it took him years for him to actually so he actually, let me put it in this way. He had doubts when he studied the Bible. He had doubts, and he was really skeptical to go to church and all that. And we're told, if I'm not mistaken, he was a Baptist and all that. But as he began to study Bible subjects, actually, he began to be more interested and started attending Sunday services and all that. But we're going to jump to 1831 when he began his public ministry. And then we are told that when he began to preach, because he has now discovered more truth, especially with regard to the second coming of Christ, with regard to the cleansing of the sanctuary based on the 2300 days. He began to really, he has been studying in the previous years, but now he had decided to go on into public ministry. And it was not easy for him to actually begin to preach, to people. He was more like a student of the Bible, instead of him being the preacher right in the beginning. But a very funny story actually happened when he began actually to preach. I was reading this book. I hope I'm gonna find that piece, because it was very interesting when he started actually preaching. So there was his nephew. We are told he lived about 16 miles away from where he stayed in New York during that time in 1831. And then what happened is that his sister, who was married, actually they sent his nephew to go to his house so that they can invite him to preach, because the preacher in that church where his sister attended, he was away and there was no one to preach. It was a huge struggle because he never thought he would stand in public and all that. But obviously it took him time to be convinced, but we are told that he ended up actually going there to preach. And then that's where he began actually to be invited, because people were interested in his unique messages that he was presenting during that time. And then now the focal point of the whole, evangelistic campaign, was in New England. And then after that, that's when more people began to be interested. And in the beginning, it was actually preaching or doing the evangelistic meetings alone. But then we are told that later on he met Joshua Hines. That was in 1839. When he met him, And then we were told that Miller actually was an earnest preacher. He was a good preacher, but he was not a good promoter. But when he met this man was not just an ordinary man in Boston. He was actually a man of influence. So he he was not just a preacher, Joshua Himes. He was also an editor, businessman, advertising executive, and a zealous promoter. So this is what led to the explosion. I'm sorry, my slides are moving around. So this man actually, he's the one. When they met, there was an explosion now in the preaching or in the spreading of good news. So the gospel began to actually go around the United States of America through publications and also through gathering of people. So they began even to hire bigger halls so that people could come in to listen to the gospel. And many people were converted, and then also preachers were born by Miller's messages, who actually also began to spread the gospel. So it was no longer him alone, but also other people who have joined him or who have joined the Millerite movement and all that. And then now we'll just jump to the Bible conferences between 1840 and 1842. We're told that a series of general conferences of the believers or Advent believers were held in various cities in New England. So people began to be more and more interested in the gospel. And the reason why we need to talk about this, is important that any we are easily attracted by new light, if I can put it that way. Where new light is so attractive in a sense that you give it an ear. So which means that new light is so the nature of the gospel is completely different from what we normally listen to. So it's very attractive. Hence, this message was so attractive. And we're going to deal with some of the ways that they've used actually to attract and to help people to understand their messages. We were told at that time that about 200 leaders were associated with these conferences, and then which unified their thinking and stimulated their preaching. And then they were from obviously different churches. Some of them were pastors or ministers, of popular denominations. And then they preached the first angel's message in their own pulpits, in their churches, in various public meetings and at camp meetings. And then what happened is that when they understood the first angel's message, they also went back. So this movement was not a one denominational movement. It was multi-denominations, people from different walks of life, people from different churches across America. So they began to actually hold these conferences and to actually embrace the first angel's message, or the messages that were being preached and all that. And obviously, signs of the time. This was the publication platform that was used also to propagate, the truth at that time. And then they formed an association called Adventist Association, and then without shifting their loyalty from their own congregations or denominations. So hence, it was not in the beginning as if you are being called to this particular church. People were interested in those conferences, which everybody was invited because the message was appealing to everyone. People from different denominations, they were all expecting that Jesus will definitely come, and then we're living in the end of times. And then continuing with what happened with the experiences of 1840 and 1842. And then we are told that, the common doctrines discussed at the conferences that were taught, they discussed issues around the nature of the second coming of Christ in the cloud of heaven and the signs, as seen in the dark day. And then I think we covered that in the previous presentations, meteoric tower, and then the conditions of unrest in the prophecies, the prophecies in the book of Daniel, and all that. So obviously observing, and there, so it says ending with the three wars and their confirmation, observing the loss of independence of the Ottoman Empire, in the 1840s. I think we also dealt with issues around Daniel 11 and the era on Uriah Smith writing with regard to that. And then obviously the 1260 years of the papal domination, which ended with the arrest of Pope in 1798, and other prophecies. And the most important one, the 2300 days Bible prophecy. Sorry, it's a typo there on 21. And then we were told that many people who were not even churchgoers were converted. And this is very important because we are going to have more or less or similar experiences just before Christ's second return. There's going to be another great religious awakening. So we need to actually make sure that our teachings and our understanding is aligned with this subject or these topics or these doctrines that were being discussed, because they are very key in helping people understand where we are, where we have been, and what will definitely happen. So hence these messages were very sort of like appealing to their minds and all that. Even infidels were actually converted, and the sale of Bibles rose sharply. Another instance in Bible history where the Bible sale or the printing or the publication of the Bible went viral, it was in the early 1800, after the end of the Dark Ages or papal domination, or the end of 1260 years or 1260 days Bible prophecy. So there was a man around 1843 who was called Charles Fitch. So we are told that he printed a sermon that he had previously preached, applying Revelation 14, verse 8 that we just read, and Revelation 18, 2 to 4 to the Protestant churches as well as the Roman Catholicism. This man was brave, and then he was not afraid to say that all the branches of the Christendom, which had become Babylon and had fallen by rejecting the messages of Christ, second coming. And who are these branches? What are these branches of Christendom? It's the Protestant churches and the Roman Catholicism. So he was brave enough, and all that. So now I just want to bring this part. As much as people were now beginning to realize that they have become part of Babylon, these churches have fallen because they have embraced error. They are not preaching the message of the hour. So then this was actually beginning of the time when people now were withdrawing themselves from the church, and then there was an animosity began to arise against the advent of Millerite people. So other people were disfellowshipped. Others had their membership had to be discontinued, or they had to be asked to decide whether they want to continue in their nominal churches or they want to join this advent movement and all that. And then while people were being converted, or people were actually getting more interested in the message of second coming, and they were convinced. So this man developed a chart. So the 1843 feet chart, we're told that this chart unified preachers. So what they've done, even though William Miller actually in his preaching he had used diagrams and small charts and all that, they began to put up charts that were reprinted so that all those who were preachers who were going on preaching, they must use them and all that. Whenever there was a meeting, so there were charts with regard to the prophecies in the Bible, in the book of Daniel, and also Revelation. Charts were actually printed, and then which means that the discussions began to be surrounded on those charts. And then actually we are told by other historians that these charts unified the preachers. So they began to actually consolidate these small charts into this feed chart and all that. Some of the things actually were removed. There were improvements, and then feed chart was regarded as a standard one. For instance, with regard to the three horns, William Miller, I mean, he had a different view. In his own, he had the Lombardy, the Rome, and Ravennas. But on this one by Fitch, it was discovered that those three little horns are represented by the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and the Herulis, and all that. So there were a lot of improvements that were made and all that. Even though it was not easy, William Miller were told that he didn't really, it didn't sit well with him and all that. But through intense study, he got convinced, and then this was accepted as a standard chart. And then the lecturers or the preachers began to travel from place to place and using these picture like symbols in all their presentation. So everybody who saw them, they were like, oh, these are chart people. Every time they meet you, it's going to roll out, it's like they're scrolls, like you just roll out charts. And I was reminded, when some of us, because I grew up in the church, so we had a lot of charts. So when we were still in those classes, your kindergarten, when we were young, so our teachers used charts, to explain the story, and we were able to understand and narrate Bible story from childhood. So I believe that a picture saves thousands of words and all that. So obviously it was appealing to see those charts, seeing those beasts and whatnot. So is it something that we can do as people? Is it something that we think it's the way to go, where we use charts? And I believe that if I were to present Bible prophecy teachings just using text like this slide, it will be difficult for people to understand. But if I put charts, it's much easier to relate and actually have a better understanding and all that. And then during that time, obviously, believers were advised to separate from their congregations. And then I just thought I must bring this verse. In the beginning, they respected their congregations. When they received the message, they preached in their pulpits. It was not that time of calling people out, but the time has come around that time. And then I believe that this was the fulfillment of this verse in this context during this time, 2 Corinthians 6, verse 17, where the Bible says, wherefore, come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. This was the time of separation from the congregation, so that everybody, so those who do not, so this was done because there's no way that we can be in a situation where we believe in different things and be together. There must be that time of separation, so that those who are continuing to reject the message of the advent of Christ, of the cleansing of the earth, must be separated, and then those who believe must come out and be on their own, so that they can wait for the coming of Christ. And then I'm not sure this statement whether I've put it in a right place, this one, but then Ellen White, we're told that recounts the experience of her family in this book, where she says in page Life Sketches, page 50 and 53, the next Sunday at the commencement of the love feast, the presiding elder read off our names, 7 in number, as discontinued from the church. So this is what has happened, because now Ellen White, or the Hammond family, has now joined, the Advent movement. So their names were read off and all that, and they were discontinued from the church or disfellowship, because they have now embraced the Millerite teachings, or the teachings at that time, that Babylon is fallen, and then people must come out of it. And then when some of the Advent preachers applied the term Babylon directly to the churches that rejected the doctrine of judgment and the return of Christ, the message of the second angel was joined to that of the first. A paper entitled Babylon the Great is Fallen was published in Oswego, in New York, by the summer of 1844. We are told that at least 50,000 believers had separated from the churches to form groups of their own. This was the impact of the message during that time. And now we're entering now the midnight cry, which is also very important. I think I'm about to finish now, because we're going to deal with part 1, and then part 2 we'll deal with it next week with regard to section 3. And then we are told, actually, William Miller, because he's been studying the Bible for years, and then they have attempted to come up with a definite time, or the end of that 2,300 days. And then we know that at first they declared that it was in about 1843, and then obviously now they've realized that it was not, because there was a disappointment. So there was a time, or that tearing time, that they were actually waiting for Jesus to come, but that actually never happened in 1843. But that was the error that was in their calculation. And we're told that at the camp meeting in New Hampshire, there was a man actually who came in that in that meeting, and his name was Samuel Snow. And then when he was called forth, he was able to point out or to clarify on some of the issues that this brethren has gone wrong on, which was the whole calculation. So there was an error which has brought about the shift from 1843 to 1844. So the wrong method that was used was actually to use they call it a thermometer method. So they actually did not count zero. So when they did not count zero, when you take 2,300 days and then you subtract 457 from the decree by Artaxerxes to rebuild Jerusalem in 457 BC, then it comes down to 1843. But the correct method was actually to make sure that you count year zero as a year as you switch from BC to AD. And when he showed them that this correct method, it was not easy. We're told that it was not easy for them to beat, but they eventually, because it was convincing that Elder Samuel Snow, the way he was explaining it. And then he also touched on actually the 70 weeks prophecy, when it would begin and end it. So, and when he studied that it would end in autumn, of which the Millerite movement, or William Miller in his calculation, this was to be, so the Christ was supposed to come actually around March or April or during spring in the Northern Hemisphere, but this was to happen during autumn, actually, and all that. So, and then obviously he also explained about the fulfillment of the 2,300 days, that it will occur in autumn, not in the spring, as the Millerites thought. And then obviously he also pointed out about the Millerites' understanding that the sanctuary to be cleansed was to be earthly, of which it was not. And then he also showed them that the cleansing would occur on the 10th day of the 7th month. So he pointed them to actually what led them to a correct method was to use a Jewish calendar. And then the Jewish calendar, it will imply that if then you are using a Jewish calendar with regard to the months and all that, so the Day of Atonement, it will occur around October. In the interest of time, I mean, we won't read Leviticus chapter 16, because that's where, I mean, it explains about what should happen on the Day of Atonement. And then in the parable of the 10 virgins, the cry was made at midnight. Samuel Snow, Midsummer Message, seemed to respond to the midnight cry. The reality of the truth gripped the hearts of the people, and they went from the camp meetings to herald the glad tidings far and wide. Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. The midnight cry was given during the tearing time, and 50,000 Advent believers were so impressed that the Lord would come that many of them did not cultivate their fields because they thought he would come before another harvest time. They spent their time proclaiming the coming of Jesus. So this is what happened. This was the impact of actually the message. And when you look at the parable of the 10 virgins, yes, it is true that this was a tearing time, that waiting time, the midnight cry. The call was made, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet them. But when you study the parables in Matthew chapter 25, you will realize that Christ was not coming to the earth. He was going to enter into marriage. He was going to the Father to receive the kingdom. He was going to the Ancient of Days and all that. But because we don't have really, I mean, time to really study the parables, because the parables in Matthew 25, they explain the entire journey of the Advent movement, the great disappointment with regard to the parable of the 10 virgins, and then him going to the Ancient of Days to receive the kingdom, and most importantly, giving, I mean, the what do you call it? What was it? The talents, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe let me just open it quickly. Matthew chapter 25. Matthew 25. Yeah, the talents. We're told that for the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling to a far country who has called his servants and deliver unto them his goods. But we know that when he comes back, it was the time of reckoning. It was the time of reckoning. What have you done? So this parable, this part of the parable is dealing with the subject of the investigative judgment. And then when you read from verse 31, we're told about the parable of the sheep and the goats and all that. But that's not the study for today. But there was that mistake that they thought that the earth or the sanctuary to be cleansed meant it was referring to the earth, but it has everything to do with the heavenly, the transition of Christ from the holy place to the most holy place. Now let's move from 1843. Now we're moving now to actually we're in 1844, but now we're now dealing with the great disappointment. So obviously they expected, based on the calculation, that in October 2022, 1844, Christ will come. As this day drew near, there was tension among the Adventists because they were waiting and all that. And then newspapers have been publishing sensational stories about the Millerite and all that. So, but we are told, however, the sober factual reports describe the Adventist groups as sincere, devout people who were calm and earnest. There were several classes of people among the Advent believers. Some had joined the group through fear, some rejected the exact date, some, as William Miller himself, until a few weeks before 1844. Then they were the honest believers, the majority of whom accepted the day. They made consistent preparation to meet Jesus. So obviously, right in this group around this time, there were people had actually there are some who joined because of fear. Uh, some they've rejected. No, there's no way to have this exact date or to say it's going to come on this date and all that. But they had so like different understanding. Others they joined through fear, and I asked myself to say that um, history will repeat itself. There are some people who are going to join the movement because of fear. We are told that the mixed multitude, as the Israelites were actually leaving Egypt, going to Canaan, many of them they were actually they they joined the group because they were fearing the plagues that were falling upon the Egyptians and all that. So the very same thing happened here, but these people were determined. And then when the day arrived, Adventists were in meeting houses and in their private homes, and then they were singing, waiting for Christ to come. But what happened? Christ did not come. When Christ did not come, God spoke, I want to believe, to this man, Hiram Edson. He had to comfort people. Whenever there's so much disappointment, you need people closer to you. People were very disappointed. There are a lot of statements that people ushered, even wrote in the book with regard to the disappointment when Christ did not come. So he said, there is a God in heaven. He has made, I'm about to finish. He has made himself known to us in blessings, in forgiving, in redeeming, and he will not fail us now. Soon, sometime soon, this mystery will be solved. And then we're told that there are many people who drifted away. Others actually ended up opening their own, churches. Others became fanatical, and then others left the faith completely, and all that. So this is what happened. But Edson, we are told, is something that really happened. Which is an interesting experience. But this man, he continued to work on encouraging people, and he went into season of prayer with some of the brethren, and then with the confidence that God is going to show us the way. This is not, the end. And then now he decided with his, I forgot the name of that brethren, but they decided that they need to visit other family members who were converted or part of the Millerite movement. And then as they were passing through the cornfield, and then some writers actually they said the reason why they used the cornfield like a route, it was because probably they were shy that people would be laughing at them to say, you see, you've been preaching this and that. But that was not the case, because we're told that Hiram Edson was a very strong man who was very he was strong in public and vocal. He wouldn't do that. So the Cornfield experience led this man and others to intensively study the sanctuary service given to Israel and the significance of the doctrine of 2,300 days. We're told that they published their findings in Advent journals, and Hiram Edson called the conference late in 1845. Now the mystery was resolved and the dates confirmed. So they've confirmed that indeed the end of the cleansing of the sanctuary, it has everything to do with the transition of Christ from the holy to the holies, and it was the beginning of the investigative judgment. So that was also very key. And then now began, after 1844, the proclamation of the third angel message that we find in Revelation chapter 14. We are told that the study of the sanctuary was the key that unlocked the mystery of the disappointment. It was also the key to the central doctrine of the third angel message, which points especially to the law of God and particularly the consequences of transgression. So there was a lady during the time of the Midnight Cry in 1844, Mrs. Rachel Oakes, and then we are told that she was a Seventh-day Baptist. So she kept the Sabbath. So she came to Washington, New Hampshire, to visit her daughter, who was also one of the Advent believers. But we are told that she was a believer in the Bible Sabbath. And then she had brought some tracts, and all that. So what we are told that so she did accept the Advent doctrine, and she continued to keep the Sabbath, and she actually became the source of truth when it comes to the revelation of the Sabbath. When I read the history, so the first Adventist minister to accept the Sabbath, it was Frederick Wheeler. And then we was a Methodist minister and associate of William Miller. He did accept the Sabbath truth. And then Adventists as a body were called to the Sabbath question through the essay on the subject by T.M. Pramble. I'm not going to go through this, but the Sabbath now began to be an issue. That was just after 1844. It became now a prime question of the day. So people began to be interested in the Sabbath truth and all that. Joseph Bate, when he heard about the brethren accepting the Sabbath, they are keeping the Sabbath, he decided to visit New Hampshire. And then he studied the subject, and then he realized that their views were correct, and he accepted the truth. And then returning home, I won't really go through that. But when he met Mr. Hall again, he decided that he wants to read the Bible. One thing that I like about these brethren is that they did not just believe in verbal, they did not believe in just somebody telling them, this is the truth, and all that. They studied the Bible. They were like the Bereans. They didn't just believe because somebody's saying so and all that, which is very important in our Christianity today. We need to believe because we have read and understood, not because the church teaches this, not because pastor this, he preached this and that. It must be thus says the Lord. We need to use the Bible as our standard or measure or determining whether this is truth or this is error. And then the interesting part with regard to embracing Sabbath truth, like the part when actually Ellen White and James White, you remember that they got married, I think, in 1846. And then with regard to the Sabbath conferences that actually were introduced after 1844. Remember, they used previously in the 1842, 1843, they used to have general conferences where they were discussing all these subjects. And this time it was more like Sabbath conferences, because Sabbath has become the present truth has become the present truth and all that. So James White and Ellen White were told that they were not easily impressed, with the importance of the Sabbath doctrine. At first, after their marriage, White studied this family studied the pamphlets that Bates has published, and they soon accepted actually the